President Ijeong is visiting China today on a state visit at the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. And not only is the visit to China his first since taking office, but it's also the first state visit by a South Korean leader in 9 years. As the first major diplomatic engagement of 2026, we explore the significance of the Iraq-China summit with experts. And joining me virtually is Mr. Jeff Moon. Welcome. He is the president of China Moon Strategies. He's also former assistant U.S. Trade Representative for China. Now, joining me here in the studio is Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Welcome, Professor Song.
Thank you for having me.
And also on my right is Dr. Young-sik Bang. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. Now, it's only been 2 months since the two leaders of South Korea and China met here in South Korea on the sidelines of the APEC leaders meeting. Now, in the first week of 2026, the new year, China has extended an invitation. Dr. Bang, why do you think President Lee has chosen China as his first overseas destination?
China has been a very important partner country to South Korea, regardless of political leadership in South Korea and China. So it is not so surprising that Ijeong government, since its inauguration in June last year, 2025, strongly expressed its desire to make a state visit to South Korea. And it's going to happen this time after 9 years of hiatus.
Right.
So there's no big surprise that South Korea wanting this summit meeting, state visit of South Korean president to China. On the other hand, it is more surprising that China is going to host President Ijeong of South Korea as a first state visit in the new year, 2026, which is emphasized by the foreign ministry spokesperson of China itself, meaning that both sides has a very strong desire to make this happen. So I would expect many great things coming out of this summit meeting, good and bad, because if you are true neighboring, working partner countries, then you have to put everything on the table for open and honest discussion.
Right. Well, again, it is not their first time meeting together. Professor Song, at the APEC leaders meeting, the two leaders signed an MOU for practical economic cooperation. Now, how can this momentum carry Seoul-Beijing ties from symbolic recovery to actual concrete implementation in the economic sphere?
Yeah, recently, at the end of the year of 2025, we have witnessed some Asian countries have ramped up the production because the particular purchasing managers index has been soared below 50 points, but slightly higher than 50 percentage point, which implies that the Asian manufacturing activities are on the path to recovery, not only in China, but also in South Korea, and also Taiwan, and also in Singapore. But the Vietnam and Indonesia, those countries, because of the base effect, they have enjoyed a very strong growth in the year of 2025. So that is why they have a little bit stabilized over time. So in the year of 2026, this momentum should be carried on to put the whole Asian economy, not only the South Korea, but also other countries' economy on the right path towards the recovery of the whole economy. Particularly between the relationship between China and Korea has been deteriorated for the past 3 years.
Right.
That was clearly reflected not only in the trade, the size of the trade, but also in the balance of trade between South Korea and China. Clearly, Chinese economy has faced some kind of headwind because of some stagnant possibility of the property and some commodity sectors in their industry economy. But clearly, at the beginning of the year of 2026, Xi Jinping has declared a very proactive macro policy, not only reduce the interest rate, but also help the consumers to consume more, and also they initiate some kind of big project construction in some water resource and the Guangzhou International Airport, as well as some very research center data platform. So all these areas are very crucial for the South Korean economy to participate in the exchange of the trade in terms of some kind of service and investment. So that is a kind of a transition from the goods trade between South Korea and China, who's be transferred to some areas of service and investment. To that regards, this is a very important momentum.
Well, when talking about China, we cannot not talk about the U.S. Mr. Moon, also back at the APEC leaders meeting, the leaders of the U.S. and China, they agreed on a temporary truce in the trade war, including a suspension of escalating tariffs through April this year. Will economic collaboration between Seoul and Beijing influence future Washington-Beijing relations in any way? What's your take on it?
I think that from Washington's perspective, the temporary suspension of the trade war is just a fragile ceasefire, not a resolution of structural issues that are at the heart of the U.S.-China trade dispute. President Lee's trade policy emphasizes a pragmatic expansion of economic ties with Beijing. I think that the U.S. government is concerned that China may use that cooperation to try to circumvent American trade measures or perhaps even undermine the U.S.-Korea security alliance. If South Korea's deepening ties with China lead to technology leakage or undermines U.S. export controls in some way, for example, those factors could complicate negotiations with both Korea and China. I think that the U.S. hopes that its strategic partners will prioritize de-risking and supply chain security over short-term commercial benefits from Beijing. And ultimately, I think Washington views excessive economic reliance on China as a potential vulnerability that could be exploited to create cracks in the U.S.-Korea alliance.
I see. Now, Dr. Bong, Korean Peninsula issues will be among the top items on the agenda at a time when South Korean leader is so eager to resume inter-Korean talks. The question is, do you think China will be able to play a more active role in, realizing President Lee's plan?
What is important in this dynamic is not just the amount, gross amount of activism on the part of China, but the question is what kind of activism will be exercised by China. Will the active China supporting denuclearization of North Korea, or will the active China is going to supporting North Korea with nuclear weapons? So we just not want to see active China for the sake of China being active, but the activism should be made in the right direction. The Lee Jae-myung government has been really clear that he wants to secure lowest hanging fruit first toward the eventual goal of keeping entire Korean peninsula free from the fear of nuclear weapons. So what is the lowest hanging fruit defined by Lee Jae-myung government? It is a reduction of current military tension, which has been dangerously escalated during the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government.
Right.
And China will be likely on board toward this goal because China doesn't want to see very dangerous military tension on the Korean Peninsula either. So in that regard, China will be very accommodating and supportive for the request by Lee Jae-myung government to work together to reduce military tension on the Korean Peninsula. But anything beyond that, China's strategic interest might be at odds with what South Korea and the United States want from nuclear-armed North Korea. So we have to wait and see.
Definitely. Well, speaking of security issues, Mr. Moon, I'd like to turn to you for Washington's national security strategy in the new year, 2026, specifically when it comes to U.S.-China trade tensions. For example, there has been growing discussion about the so-called rare earth security. How should we understand this connection?
One of the major changes in 2025 was the emergence of rare earths as a national security issue. China first weaponized rare earths against Japan in 2010, and then weaponized its monopoly on those goods in 2025, not just against the United States, but against the entire global supply chain, which includes Korea. I think that China's success in using rare earths as a coercive tool in 2025 will tempt Chinese leaders to seek expanded leverage in a variety of other trade and non-trade contexts. China has not hesitated to bully its Asian neighbors, as South Korea learned in 2016, and Japan is learning right now. So the prospect of Chinese exploitation of rare earths leverage is a clear and present danger. So as we begin 2026, I think a major new theme to watch is the possibility of Chinese overreach on rare earths, possibly leading to increased international backlash and perhaps multilateral action. Those factors probably explain why South Korea hopes to sign a rare earths agreement at the summit meeting in Beijing next week.
Well, let us now turn to Korea-China FTA. Professor Song, it's been 10 years since that agreement has been sealed. Now, data shows that trade volume has increased, but there's also an assessment that the trade balance with China has been in deficit for 3 consecutive years. Now, there are calls for second stage negotiations for Seoul-Beijing FTA. What is this about?
I believe that the 3-year consecutive trade deficit for South Korea against China is not a bad symptom, but politically, because that has some political issues and the political relationship has been degraded to suppress the improvement or the growth of the trade relationship. As long as the total trade has been on the path to the growth, it sounds good. But let me address the issues that has been raised by Mr. Moon has mentioned is like not only just a geopolitical issue, but also geo-economic issues such as weaponization of rare earth materials and some devices. This is a very reciprocal engagement of the weaponization. South Korea has experienced some kind of that threat from Japan. Do you remember some polyimide and hydrogen polyimide issues that has been very crucial for South Korean economy, but we have overcome because of the domestic companies that make efforts, endeavor, and then create our own way. So this is like some development of some exchange of some issues, economic issues. So to that regards, currently, South Korea is, as Mr. Moon has mentioned, pointed out that we are in the position of kind of a water-shedding rich point in economically. Politically, maybe there is a room to maneuver, but economically, it is on the very sharp rich point. So what is very important is to retain some posture of a balanced posture. Otherwise, the economic issues could have a very substantial and significant impact on the economy that could have some political story about or impact in the domestic political landscape.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
Well, at the same time, the U.S. is closely following Seoul-Beijing relations. Dr. Bong, China's state media stated strong concern over Seoul-Washington's collaboration on building nuclear submarines. Now, in a situation where China is keeping the U.S. and South Korea in check, what measures do you think should be taken so that Seoul-Beijing relations remain strong?
I was a bit surprised by the rather measured and the cautious response and criticism rendered by the Xi Jinping government of China, as opposed to state media expressing far stronger criticism about South Korea and the United States collaborating on South Korea's production of nuclear power submarines as a result of a summit meeting between President Donald Trump and President Lee Jae-myung in the silence of the Gyeongju APEC summit meeting. I would have expected a far stronger response directly from President Xi Jinping of China during his meeting with President Lee Jae-myung at Gyeongju APEC meeting, or in later phase by Foreign Ministry of China. But the Foreign Ministry of China repeatedly emphasized that such an action would be in violation of the principle of nuclear non-proliferation, NPT of 1968, and it is not going to help solve the danger posed by North Korea's nuclear weapons. I would take them very mild and measured responses. Why? China sees that it is premature to take very strong criticism on Lee Jae-myung government yet.
Not yet.
Because the biggest merit of Lee Jae-myung government of South Korea is that it is not the same as previous Yoon Suk-yeol government of South Korea, who emphasized strengthening trilateral security cooperation among US, Japan, and South Korea, including South Korea playing far bigger role in Indo-Pacific strategy led by the United States. So I think Beijing is hoping that Lee Jae-myung government will be very different from its predecessor, and there's a still strategic and political room and time available for Xi Jinping government to make deals with Lee Jae-myung government of South Korea. So if China is going to put too much pressure on Lee Jae-myung government about this construction of nuclear power submarines of South Korea, which is still very uncertain because South Korea may build a nuclear power submarines, but there's no guarantee those submarines will be provided nuclear fuel from the United States because it requires consent by the Congress, not just the White House or the Pentagon. And it takes at least 15 years for South Korea, even though South Korea is a leading power in shipbuilding industry, 10 to 15 years. So it is too early for Beijing to any official and strong stance upon South Korea's construction of nuclear submarines. It is time for Xi Jinping government to, work together with the Lee Jae-myung government of South Korea, taking advantage of this summit meeting for the first time in 9 years.
Right.
Try to persuade Seoul to take reasonable measures.
So Beijing is keeping its softer tone towards South Korea because maybe they believe there's room for negotiations.
Yes, concern expressed, but no punishment decided.
I see. Now, Mr. Moon, in the meantime, then, what strategies could South Korea pursue to maintain economic balance between the U.S. and China?
I think that Korea can best maintain economic balance between the US and China by pursuing Korea's interests above all, and also by learning from China's past engagement with trading partners. China will tempt Korea to make unwise concessions in order to gain economic benefits. So Korean leaders might want to keep in mind a few historical lessons. First and foremost, Beijing frequently promises economic opportunities that it fails to deliver, with the failed US-China Phase 1 agreement being a prime example. Second, China is committed to self-sufficiency. That means that China welcomes foreign economic partners only and until China develops its own independent products, and then China generally forces foreign partners out of the China market. Third, China frequently resorts to economic retaliation, which Korea experienced during the THAAD missile crisis. And finally, cases pending right now in Korean courts reflect the ongoing threat of Chinese theft of Korean technology. So the bottom line here is that Korea must ensure that cooperation with China is not just pragmatic, but it's also clear-eyed and realistic.
That's a very interesting point. Now that you've mentioned THAAD, Dr. Bong, there is growing anticipation that China may lift that cultural ban on South Korea, which dates back to 2016, the deployment of THAAD. Now, what do you see as the most important variables for restoring Seoul-Beijing relations at this point?
First of all, according to the official account and position held by Chinese government, there has never been cultural ban officially imposed by the Chinese government.
Right.
So there's no issue to be discussed in the first place. And second, if there has been kind of an unofficial cultural ban on South Korea's cultural products to be exported to China, then it should be left to be determined by free market, in the bilateral trade context. So what Chinese government can do in terms of promoting cultural exchange between the countries would be inherently limited. So what Xi Jinping government is likely to promise President Lee Jae-myung of South Korea during this summit meeting is a very good intended promise that Chinese government, as a government, would do its part to encourage Chinese collaborators of South Korean companies to promote mutual understanding and exchange of culture activities. But no direct government intervention can be promised. And I do not expect the Xi Jinping government of China is ready to give the full green light to importation of popular culture of South Korea into Chinese market at this historical juncture, because cultural products are not immune to political effect.
They're not.
South Korea is a country that impeached leaders twice in peaceful manners. And South Korea has grown as a globalized and democratized society, filled with exercise of individual freedom, free exchange of ideas, and whatnot. So there is a string attached to every single South Korea's pop culture product to be consumed by Chinese. If Chinese people will be too influenced by the quality and the characters of South Korea's pop culture products, then it's going to impose a great deal of threat to the stability and legitimacy of Chinese Communist Party leadership. So there's a political risk that Xi Jinping government has to take if it's going to decide to open more gates for the importation of pop culture products from globalized and democratic, thriving South Korea.
So maybe China will not, well, President Xi Jinping will not officially recognize that cultural ban, but he may be, pushing for that culture and people-to-people exchanges between the two countries, right?
Right.
Well, I do have to point out, Professor Song, during this trip, President Lee Jae-myung will be accompanied by a business delegation of 200 people. Now, what are the background factors and also expected benefits from this companionship?
Yeah, during the state visit to China from January 1st to 7th, substantial time has been spent in visiting Shanghai and the surrounding areas. Actually, as you know, the vicinities and Shanghai is the center of some digital industry, also confectionery industry. So many manufacturing companies and factories are concentrated in the surrounding areas. So that means that economic implication is very huge, and I would like to say that to take advantage most of this situation is President Lee Jae-myung and also their cabinet members should focus and should be focus on some issues, the relationship with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Actually, the organization comprised with member countries such as the STAN countries and also the observers, including Turkey and Egypt and other several third world countries would like to participate in. Therefore, this is a very good opportunity to secure some kind of rare earth materials and other important natural resources such as oil and some precious metals. To that regard, this is a really good chance to expand our economy's capability and capacity into some inside the continent who has huge resources. So this is what I would like to say one point. And also, I would like to mention that utilizing, as I mentioned earlier, the macro policy adopted by the Chinese government. So this is no chance to lose. So that is the point I would like to say here.
Well, I do have to point out South Korea's diplomatic framework has been, economic cooperation with China, but Dr. Bong, security with the U.S. Now, with the Seoul-Beijing ties entering a new phase, how should South Korea's diplomatic course evolve in the new year, in 2026?
In 2026, Lee Jae-myung government of South Korea has to stay the right course, as it has been in the past, which is to create international environment that is fitting and conducive to South Korea's own principle of survival and development, which is to promote productive and peaceful bilateral partnership between China and South Korea, which is compatible with military alliance between South Korea and the United States. That's the golden rule. The exam question is out there, but answering the question is difficult. You know the question, but writing the correct answer in detail is always a challenge for every South Korean government in every year. And this year is, unfortunately for President Lee Jae-myung, no exception.
Right. Well, that's why he's been pursuing the pragmatic diplomacy. Now, Mr. Moon, how do you expect U.S.-China trade tensions to unfold in 2026 in the new year then? I mean, will 2026 be an opportunity or a risk for South Korea when it comes to Washington-Beijing relations? I mean, tensions, rather.
I think the two factors that have bedeviled U.S.-China trading relations for decades are going to continue to prevent the U.S. and China from reaching a grand bargain in 2026. The first factor is China's decision in its 5-year plan, the 15th 5-year plan, to double down on its official policy of subsidizing Chinese industry, creating overcapacity, dumping Chinese products into international markets, and thereby deindustrializing market-based economies. The second trend is the determination, which is increasing, of the U.S. and its allies to prevent China from flooding international markets with subsidized goods sold below cost. The U.S.-China trading relationship won't rupture completely in 2026, but the friction that those contradictory trends produce will ensure that we'll continue to see harsh rhetoric, retaliatory measures, and I think a tense atmosphere. China promised when it joined the WTO in 2001 to become a market economy, and the U.S. spent many years trying to encourage that outcome. Sadly, however, China in recent years has revealed that in fact it never intended to adopt market principles, which guarantees friction with market-based partners, including Korea for that matter, into the indefinite future.
Indeed. Well, before we wrap up our discussion, Professor Song, what key opportunities should not be missed at the upcoming Yishi summit?
Practically, the economic issues are of most importance, and to make some agreement and MOU to increase the trade amount between South Korea and China. And also, as I mentioned earlier, our government should expand our interests and our attentions and relationship through to some Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and including those India and those countries, because that is very crucial for the South Korea economy to grow further and to reach another plateau in the future.
All right, Professor Song, it was a pleasure to have you with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And also, Dr. Bong, thank you for your time and your insight.
You're welcome. As
always. And Mr. Moon, over in DC, thank you so much for connecting with us all the way from the U.S. today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, that wraps up our discussion on the ROC China Summit. This has been Kim Dami. Goodbye.